Christmas pageants that I've seen through the decades, I'm struck by how much has been left out. In the nativity stories that I've seen for child actors, we get angel choirs, shepherds, animals in a stable, not real animals usually, but children in animal costumes. I remember there was a hierarchy, wasn't there, in Christmas pageants? You know, if there was competition in my childhood church of who got to be Mary, you didn't want to be the back part of the donkey. You probably didn't want to be a donkey at all. There were angel choirs. Those of us who were taller and blonder were put in the angel choirs. The rambunctious boys were, well, we'll make them barnyard animals. And you can ponder why childhood nativity directors may have made those decisions, but we never see in elementary school nativity pageants, at least I haven't, the kids acting out today's gospel. It would make us deeply uncomfortable. And we'd probably have a lot of questions when we got home about why Joseph was having to make these decisions. But as an adult, I find that this nativity story, this one that only comes around every 3 years, we don't hear Joseph's story every year, it may have more to say to us in our non-Christmas lives than a lot of the rest of the incarnation story. Let us consider Joseph, as we so rarely do. And even on his feast day, March 19th, we don't focus on the aspect of Joseph that we see in today's gospel. In March, we celebrate Joseph as the stepfather in that role, but in contrast, in today's gospel, I can almost hear Joseph thinking, how did my life get so messy? Here's Joseph preparing for marriage, and his bride-to-be is pregnant with a baby that he is certain is not his. And even today, with our modern sensibilities, it's not hard to sympathize with Joseph, to face the bewilderment that one feels when facing a problem that is not going to magically fix itself. Even in our time today, this situation, a beloved has been with another, is enough to make us feel shame. Now take that level of shame and magnify it. As a male in an ancient patriarchal culture, most men in Joseph's situation would have personal shame for themselves, shame about the betrothed, shame about the larger family, and subsequently, some unpleasant decisions to make. By law, Joseph could have decided to have Mary stoned, the kind that ends in death, that kind of stoning. That was one of the prerogatives of a man in his position. But instead, he decides to disentangle himself quietly, which shows us an important aspect of his character. He still has hope, I imagine, of a conventional life. I'll get this settled with Mary, then I'll find somebody else to marry. And maybe I can have a family after all, and some stability, and a chance to leave this scandal behind. But into this decision, God steps in with an option that almost no man in Joseph's culture would consider, to stay with the woman who is pregnant with someone else's baby. Matthew is the gospel of dreams and visions. The angel choirs and big announcements during waking hours, that's the gospel of Luke. And we'll hear some of that on Christmas Eve on Wednesday. But today, the student in me wants to know that if the dream that Joseph had was of a different quality than his normal dream life. And what I really want to know, of course, is does God still speak to us in dreams? And how can we be sure that it's God speaking to us in those dreams and not, something we ate or something we were watching just before we fell asleep? Of course, maybe that's the way that God speaks to us now, by prompting us to feel inspired by what we've been reading or watching. Back to Joseph. He emerges from his dream, ready to show a new way to be faithful. He takes Mary for his wife and Jesus for his child. As I read this text again on Saturday morning, the words of the angel in the dream jumped out to me. Be not afraid. Unlike the angel visitations that we'll hear about on Christmas Eve, Joseph has other reasons to fear. It's not just, oh my goodness, there's an angel standing here before me. He has thought he was headed to one kind of life, and now he's headed to some very different direction. A direction that might bring scorn and derision. He thought he knew Mary, and he thought he could anticipate their lives together, and now what's going to happen? Off he goes into an unknown direction. Even the lives of the patriarchs and prophets, the teaching of the Torah and the law, all that has come before, that's not going to be a guidebook now. Joseph will be the first to be the stepfather to the divine. Now, you probably know at least one person who treats the Bible as a guidebook. The one who has a Bible verse tucked away for every situation. They're the ones who would tell us how we could dream like Joseph and be convinced not only what God is speaking to us, but that it is God and that the way is clear. However, as we look at the wide diversity of call stories across the Bible, the one thing we see through the ages is that God calls people to step out in faith without a complete guidebook, without a complete plan, without knowing what the end will be, or maybe what the middle will be. Joseph doesn't know what every step of the journey will be. He doesn't have a divine plan as a series of choices to make with outcomes that will be perfect. But the angel tells him the first step, take Mary as your wife. Well, maybe the first step is, do not be afraid. And then the second step is, take Mary as your wife. Across the Bible, we see stories of God calling people to a path they never would have predicted, may not have even considered, and perhaps would have not chosen for themselves or by themselves, at least not at first. Think about those first Jewish patriarchs, Abraham, Moses. Think about David the shepherd, who becomes Israel's greatest king. Think about the prophets, and in the New Testament, we have Mary and Elizabeth, all the disciples, Saul, who became Paul, the earliest believers, and the story of God's revelation does not end with the Bible. Across centuries of church history, God continues to invite people to step outside of convention and to dream bigger dreams. The angel tells Joseph not to be afraid, and we need to remember that he has plenty to cause him fear. Fear of what his friends and neighbors will say when he decides to join his life to Mary. Mary, who is pregnant with someone else's child. Does Joseph have anyone who will hear about his dream and not doubt his scenario? And then there's the fear of the scenario itself that the angel describes. Mary is carrying the child who will be the fulfillment of the ancient prophecy. There's no child care manual for that scenario. If there was, surely it would begin with the angel's directive to Joseph. Do not be afraid, and do not abandon the woman who is carrying that baby in her womb. God still calls to those of us with ears to hear, and God calls us to destinies that don't have how-to manuals attached. God calls to us, even if we come from families scorched with scandals. Maybe it's ill-advised relationships, or addictions, or other choices gone wrong, either through our own fault, the fault of others, nobody's fault, but things go wrong. God calls to us, even if we're in the midst of messy lives. God doesn't wait for us to pull ourselves together to show that we're worthy and ready. No, God does encourage us to work on relationships of love, even if it means a risk of embarrassment, like in Joseph's situation. God comes to us in the midst of messiness and invites us to be part of something even stranger and more wondrous. From his first appearance, Jesus shows us a different way to be human. We see it in today's story, Jesus acting even before he is born, his existence prompting Joseph to step away from Joseph's plan for a conventional and traditional marriage. In the middle of a scandal not of his making, Joseph struggles with his instinct for self-preservation and ultimately shows his openness to God's plan for his life and for the whole world. We live in a world that is increasingly messed up, messy, chaotic, and disarray. In some ways, it's a world that bears resemblance to those Sunday school Christmas pageants, with children pretending to be something they're not. And for some of us, it's a place where we learn shame for what we can't do, like sing or stand still in an animal costume. But for some of us, the nativity pageant is the place where we first learn the amazing story of God's love for us and the whole world. In both the childhood nativity pageant and today's gospel, we see that God is not finished with humanity, and that message is still relevant today. The nativity story is not constrained by a manger 2,000 years ago. God still comes to us in times of wonder, in times of scandal, asking us to take the first faithful step, asking us to do the next faithful thing, shaping us as we become ever more faithful people. Listen, God still speaks to us in the 21st century. By way of dreams, by way of angel choirs, by inspiration, by all the ways we support each other. Across the centuries and today, God still comes to us, insisting that we move beyond our self-interest and telling us not to be afraid to do what will support the salvation of the world. Listen, soon and very soon, we're going to see the King. Amen.